Greetings, historians. My name is Miss Jackson. I'm a fifth grade teacher at Hodge Elementary, and today's lesson will be covering the Roaring 20s, standard SS 5H2 post-World War I. With standard SS 5H2 Part B, we will describe the cultural developments and individual contributions in the late 1920s of the Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, baseball, the automobile, and the transatlantic flight. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the individual contributions in the 1920s by Louis Armstrong, the Jazz Age, Langston Hughes, Harlem Renaissance, Beirut, baseball, Henry Ford, the automobile, Charles Lindbergh, transatlantic flight. It's time to take a step back in time. We're traveling back to the 1920s, a time in history right after the United States won World War I. The American people were happy and enjoying life. So let's join aboard my time machine as we travel back to 1920. My name is Josephine Baker. I was a dancer during the 1920s, and I'm here today to introduce five of my extraordinary friends who had a tremendous impact on the cultural development during the 1920s. So hold on, you guys. Americans during this time found time to enjoy themselves during the 1920s with singing, dancing. They was going out enjoying life. We're going to start by discussing the Jazz Age. During the 1920s, radio was how Americans connected with the world. From listening to the latest music, sports, TV broadcasts, it was all done through the radio. And the radio also helped jazz grow in popularity. Let me introduce one of the baddest trumpet players of the 1920s. His name is Louis Armstrong. Boy, could he play that trumpet. Louis Armstrong was a famous jazz musician during the Jazz Age. Jazz began by African Americans in the South. People of all colors enjoyed listening and dancing to the new music. Now let's jump over to the Harlem Renaissance. Woo, did I love the Harlem Renaissance. Walking down the streets of Harlem, New York. Woo, what can I say? It was a time. It was a place where the African American community was overflowing with talented musicians, artists, and writers. And did you know Harlem, New York? New York is part of our 50 states in the United States. Harlem, New York became the center for African American musicians, artists, and writers in the 1920s. They wrote, sang, and painted about the hardships and joys of being African American. This was a time where African Americans were creating new music, art, and the culture was surely growing. Let me introduce one of my favorite poets during that time, a very dear friend, Mr. Langston Hughes. He was a leader and famous poet during the Harlem Renaissance. One of my favorite poems written by Langston Hughes is titled, Dream Deferred. He really could express his feelings, especially how African Americans felt during the 1920s. So bear with me while I recite Dream Deferred. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Woo! What can I say? That was truly one of my favorite poems. Langston Hughes was addressing the increased frustration and anger felt by African Americans who dream of equality was continually being deferred during this time. And boy, did he express himself through this poem. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's jump over to a little baseball. Do you like sports? What about baseball? Well, let me tell you about my friend Babe Ruth. He played for the New York Yankees. He's famous for being a home run hitter. And let's not forget, baseball began to attract many fans. It became America's pastime. Americans could listen to the games on the radio, which started to become widely used. Have you heard of a car called the Mustang? Well, my friends, my dear friend Henry Ford is responsible for that car. Oh boy, do I love myself a red convertible, a red Mustang with a convertible top on a summer day, headed to the beach. Well, let's talk about a little bit more about my friend Henry Ford. He created two processes to make the automobile for Americans. He started with specialization, where each worker has a specific job, which makes making a finished product much quicker and reduces the price. And then he had created a process known as mass production, making a product quickly, which helps to lower the cost of the product. Now, many Americans could afford to buy cars. Do you love to travel? I love traveling. Well, my friend Charles Lindbergh made traveling across the Atlantic Ocean realistic. Today, we can travel around the world by plane. Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927, which made him famous and made transatlantic travel realistic. The only back then, before Charles Lindbergh's first solo flight, the only way to travel between continents during this time period was by boat, which was a slow process. And boy, do I understand that process, because I've been on plenty of boats during my time. Okay, boys and girls, it's time for me to travel back to 2020 so you can greet your teacher, Miss Jackson. Wow, the 1920s was amazing. Did you enjoy Miss Josephine Baker and our history walk through the 1920s? I sure did. It's time to test your knowledge on our 5 famous friends with a short quiz. I'll give you a second. Let's start with question number 1. The first solo transatlantic flight was achieved by who? If you said Charles Lindbergh, you're correct. Great job. Next question. He was a famous jazz musician during the Jazz Age. If you said Louis Armstrong, you're correct. Great job. He played for the New York Yankees and is famous for being a home run hitter. If you said Babe Ruth, you're correct. Great job, you guys. He created the first automobile and made cars affordable for many Americans by using specialization and mass production. If you said Henry Ford, you're correct. Great job, you guys. He was a famous African American poet during the Harlem Renaissance. If you said Langston Hughes, you're correct. Great job, you guys. And this ends our short quiz, but you're not done yet. Today, you will be a historian. Let's find out what historians do. They dig deeper, they analyze, they do a little bit more research. And today, you are a historian because you get a chance to dive a little deeper. You can dig deeper by creating trading cards for my 5 famous friends we learned about today. And it's very simple. You can grab materials from around your house, paper, if you scratch paper, if you have notebook paper, maybe printer paper, whatever it might be, or even note cards. You can collect at least 5 pieces, and let's get started. On the front, you can draw a picture of the person or what that person is famous for. For example, you could draw an airplane flying above the ocean for Charles Lindbergh. And then on the front of that card, you'll write the person's name and their development they are associated with, such as Jazz Age for Louis Armstrong, baseball for Babe Ruth. And on the back, you'll give that birth year and death year. And you can also include what did they do during this time? What was their cultural contributions? And I have an example to show you. I collected some scratch paper from around my house and I created these trading cards for Louis Armstrong. As you can see, it's very simple. It's not a lot to do if you have coloring pencils, crayons, pencil, whatever it might be, or some of you might have access to a printer. You can print out a picture and put it on your trading cards for your person, for one of my 5 favorite famous friends. And just have fun with it. But I know I still have some more historians that might want to dive a little even deeper into the 1920s. You can dive even deeper by doing some research on the following individuals of the 1920s. Josephine Baker, which you heard, which she gave you an awesome tour, an awesome guide through the 1920s. Duke Ellington or Francis Scott Fitzgerald. I hope you enjoyed yourselves today. And this will conclude my lesson on the Roaring 20s.